all of us are excited to partner with Avalara and bring you this webinar today on sales tax for manufacturers and distributors. Your Sage product does have some minimal sales tax capabilities, but many of us have other needs. And so today we are proud to have Sal Carrera with us, Regional Sales Manager for Avalara with more than 15 years experience in the technology industry. Sal's going to bring us a unique blend of experience and show us how Sage products can work through Avalara to solve those tax problems. Sal, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks for having us, and folks, thanks for joining. We're going to kind of jump right into things today, and what we'll try to do is start real general, give you a really quick idea of what Avalara does, and then we want to get into some of the more specific and trickier issues that we see facing manufacturers and distributors today relative to sales and use tax. Starting off, let me give you a little bit of a 60,000-foot overview of Avalara. So what we do is we have a pre-built connector that integrates to your Sage software, and the idea is that you don't have to worry about researching or updating tax schedules. It'll automatically work, and it even validates the addresses. So the idea is we're going to set the schedule to AvaTax, and Avalara automatically does the work. And I want to talk a little bit in general real quick about why it's important to automate sales tax and why folks are outsourcing it. I think this is fairly basic. Many of you already know this. That's why you're here today. But I think it bears covering just briefly. So when we look at this map and you see all these different color codes, what it's showing is every color code represents a different tax jurisdiction. So the point being, the more states that you're in, the more different jurisdictions you are, and there's an incredible amount of difficulty into capturing the correct rates because there's no rhyme or reason or uniformity with the jurisdictions, and that assumes that you capture the right jurisdictions in the first place. Then, even when you do that, you have to know the taxability of the products, and the rules can be very strange. For example, take an everyday item like candy bars. These are taxable, but a Kit Kat isn't because it has flour, and therefore it's considered food. If you think that's crazy, you even have something as silly as these rounds on the right or cotton balls on the left. Basically the same type of item for the same purpose, but one is taxable and one is not. We use those as illustrations. Imagine with all the different items that you sell and the different clients that you sell to, all the different possibilities of taxability, and then throw in labor, and it gets even more interesting. So then you come to returns and exemption certificates, and every state has different forms. So you've got different returns, different rules and requirements, different resale certificates or other exempt documents, and it gets very complicated. So with Avalara, what we try to do is be a one-stop shop. What you'll notice on the top here is we have pre-built connection software or system that you use today to create an invoice, and Avalara can automatically calculate the tax within that system. So the idea is accurately and automatically calculate tax, file and remit the returns. We actually log in, send the money, file the return for you, and we have an automated workflow to allow you to request the certificate for your client to create it, for you to validate it, store it, and even manage the renewals. All of that happens online in the software. How it works in principle is when you're creating an invoice, you're going to call out to Avalara, and Avalara is going to give you the tax you need. We do that because we regularly communicate with the states, and we've got all this information in here in terms of the jurisdictions and the content. And then at the end of the month, after Avalara calculates the tax, we file and remit the returns on your behalf. Forgive me here, I'm using a Sage 100 as an example, but it works exactly the same in 300, 500, X3, Sage 50, doesn't matter. The concepts here that I want you to see is mostly when we talk to people, they have dozens of tax schedules that they have to manage. With Avalara, you set the tax schedule to AvaTax and you forget it. And Avalara is going to do the rest of the work. You don't have to do anything. One of the things we do is we validate the addresses, and this is going to make sure that you're shipping to a good address, that you don't get dinged by your carrier, and more importantly, it's going to make sure we've got rooftop accuracy when it comes to assigning the jurisdictions. I can click on the A here and validate that address, and just using my address, it corrected everything so that we know we have the right rates and the right address. That's within the customer card. And then the other place that we connect to Sage is in sales order. So let's step over there real quick, and I'll show you what that looks like. So the key thing when we get into sales order entry is it works exactly the way that it does today. So if I come in here and I've got a particular customer, all I do is pull up that customer record, and I've got the schedule set to Avatax. So that means all I have to do is enter my order like I normally would. So as I adjust the quantities and build my order, all I do is click total. When I click total, Avalara is going to go out, and Sage is going to do a web services call to Avalara. Avalara is going to look at the address. We're going to assign the jurisdictions. We're going to look at the taxability for these items, and we're going to calculate the tax. And that all happens in a split second. I'm going to show you this one more time as soon as this is done. This is the first time I've used the demo software today, so a split second is taking more like a few seconds. So let me just do that one more time because I want you to see the speed. So normally, except for the first time every day, you're going to go in, I'm going to put the quantities in, and then click total, and watch how fast it goes. Boom. So in 1 second, Avalara calculated the tax. Now the significance here is the user didn't have to go in and research and set up tax tables, and there's nothing to do or maintain. You just process the order like you do today, and off you go. So there's some other feature functionality within Avalara, but in terms of what it does in Sage, it's really that simple. You set the tax schedule to Avatax on the order entry screen, or excuse me, on the customer card, and then you just use order entry the way you do now. So that's the basic core, right, of what we do. And when we get into the Midwest, and I live in Ohio, so I'm right smack dab in it with you, there's a lot of manufacturing, a lot of distribution. And so sometimes the need for sales tax software isn't as obvious because maybe a lot of your clients are exempt. But what we find is there's lots of audit risk with things like use tax, things like exempt sales, things like drop shipments. And as we go through today, we're going to talk about some of the examples and things that you want to be on the lookout for. And then as we wrap it up towards the end, we'll talk about some of the things that you can do with Avalara to resolve this. So one of the things we see with distributors and manufacturers is you're more likely to get audited than other folks. And the reason why is the auditors want to collect as much as they can with as little effort as they can. And so they actually can get more revenue for the state by going into a business and looking at things like exemption certificates, where if they find 15% of the sample to be wrong, they can extrapolate and charge you 15% of your sales. Further, they can go back and collect the amount from your client, perhaps even subjecting your client to an audit. We've even had a situation where a customer called Northern Tool had a $700 sale that cost them $22,000. So again, manufacturers and distributors get targeted for things like exempt sales and use tax. And we're going to go into some other examples of what the cost of noncompliance can be. If you want to be able to address this, you have to understand the whole process. You know, what's exempt, what's not exempt. We have a lot of examples where manufacturers themselves are exempt. And so their customers, or excuse me, their vendors don't charge them tax. Well, guess what? Let's say you're exempt because you're a manufacturer, but you buy things like safety equipment, safety goggles, etc. You still need to pay use tax on those items because if they're not involved in manufacturing, they may not be exempt. So there's all kind of different iterations and permutations within the rules, and it's very difficult to keep track of, which is one of the reasons folks like to automate. Let's say I purchase something and it's for manufacturing. It's got to be exempt, right? Well, it's not even that simple. So it depends basically on predominance, meaning how much of it is actually used in the process, or, you know, you have some states where it's required to be exclusive, meaning if it's not 100% used in the process, it doesn't qualify. Again, some states will allow partial exemption, some states will allow full. I talked to somebody recently, and they had a situation where you take something like shrink wrap. If you don't use that till the end of the process, and maybe you're shrink wrapping a pallet and sticking it out in the warehouse, you know, that's going to be a taxable occurrence. but if you bought something that was used in the process, then it's not. And again, depending on the state, those rules could vary, whether it's exempt or not, whether it's a full exemption or a partial exemption. And what we find when we talk to companies is they kind of know, 80% of the time and 80% of the places, but very few people would tell you that they know it all the time. And in that uncertainty, there's risk. And that's the thing that the auditors play on and try to catch you up with. Again, you have things like, what if it's an item and it's a sample? Well, depending on what you do with it, creates the different taxability scenario. Again, the question that we argue with folks is you can spend your time trying to keep track of all these different things, or you can spend your time trying to drive revenue and grow your business. Same kind of thing. If you're getting into situations where you've got something for quality assurance for R&D, it's hard to figure out whether that's taxable or not. The point we're making here is not that you have to memorize this. We're not trying to give you the answers. We're trying to say you don't even have to worry about it. If you're using Avalara, this kind of information is automated, and we're automatically going to calculate things in the proper way, so you no longer have to think about it. So then you have to look at it and say, well, how much risk is it? Well, there's a couple different things. You might overpay the taxes in areas like if your suppliers could have used your exemption, or you might underpay your taxes. Maybe the vendors didn't charge the correct tax. So those are the kind of things that auditors look for. And as a manufacturer, it's up to you to assess taxes on sales and purchases. Again, there's a whole industry that exists to help companies reverse audit and identify this kind of thing, but we find it's a lot easier just to automate the process and go about focusing on your business. Another strange situation, right? And we do some of this just for fun. It's a tough subject, can be tedious, and we find some of the things you just have to laugh because otherwise you go crazy. So let's say you got a forklift, right? Believe it or not, if you use it in manufacturing and you're moving kind of from raw materials through the manufacturing line, then it's non-taxable. But if you're using it in the warehouse to move around finished goods, put it on a truck, then it is taxable. And again, this is too crazy for me to make up if these are the real kind of things that cause companies to fail audits. And again, whether you're the owner or the CFO, you're responsible for these things, and I don't care if you're a CTA or how long you've been doing it, it's kind of impossible to keep track of these obscure rules. And then if you're more of an employee who's doing things day to day, it's a really bad situation because you'll get the blame for mistakes, but you don't get any of the credit for doing it right. And at Avalara, we want to make sure not only that you do it right, but you can do it easily, and then you can focus your time on more important things. So when we look at distributors, it's fairly similar to a manufacturer. Again, you have a lot of customers where you're not collecting taxes. You need to show why, and you need to complete and remit the tax returns. It's basically the same for anybody, regardless of what part of the supply chain you're in and what kind of industry you're in. We talk to folks a lot of times, and they say, well, we sell business to business, so I'm pretty good, right? Well, not necessarily. If you do drop shipments, it can be very, very confusing. In fact, there's a group called the IPT that publishes and sells a study every 2 years, and it basically asks all states 10 different questions about drop ship rules. So if you do drop ships, you need to know, do I need to register in that state? Do I need to collect a different exemption certificate? A lot of times, if your customer is in state X, but you're shipping to state Y, your customer might be exempt in the first state, but not exempt in the second state, and all of a sudden, that sale is taxable, and if you don't charge tax, you're on the hook. So there's a lot of different variations that you need to be careful about. And again, what Avalara does is help you define the rules. In fact, there's a very large footwear company that you would all know the name of that we help to define the rules and create a policy so that their vendors and their company would always be compliant. And I should make note that while we're talking about software, Avalara also does perform services like that if you need help with tax research, nexus studies, and things like that. So we look at it. Let's say you're the person in charge of compliance at your company. There's all kind of things you have to deal with throughout the day, right? Running reports, confirming certificates are valid, requesting new ones, updating information, credit memos, and on and on and on. So again, we're having a little fun with it here. It's enough to give anybody a headache and can be very overwhelming. So again, the answer is automation. With Avalara, we're going to calculate the taxes, we're going to file your returns, we're going to help you with the exemption certificates. With that, I want to jump in a little bit more specifically about the exemption certificate. So when I talk about an automated workflow, this is what I mean. We are going to help you collect the certificate and have that information readily available so that it speaks to AvaTax, it speaks to Sage, and you have a closed loop, right? So we know that that account is exempt, and then we also have a way to automate the request for a new certificate, and if and when you get audited, it's very fast and easy, a couple clicks of the mouse, and you've got those certificates produced and ready to show. So within Avalara, you would go into our dashboard and you could request a certificate as it's shown here, and then your client's going to get an email, and then they would click on this link in blue on the screen, and then they're going to fill out the form online, sign their name online, and they send it back to you electronically, and now I've got the certificate. So very, very simple process for you and for the customer to collect the certificate. So hopefully it's all making sense. Another one here, this is kind of funny, right? You talk about weird things. And again, we make these points, A, for a little levity, but more importantly, to show you how obscure and mundane and trivial some of this is, and it's almost impossible to know all of this stuff for every place you do business. So guess what? The taxability is changing all the time on different items and different labor, and you have to keep up with it. So if you don't know, you're very susceptible. I'll give you a quick example. On something like this, the janitorial services are taxable, but commercial services aren't. So it really comes down to the inside of the window or the outside of the window. And I realize that sounds silly, but that's exactly the point. You can either become an expert in silly rules like this, or you can outsource it to somebody. When it comes to returns and remittance, a lot of times people say, you know, a lot of our transactions are $0, so I'm not really that worried about it. But there's a lot of states where you have to report to multiple jurisdictions and multiple forms. Other times we've seen states with different rules in terms of accruals and so forth, really pay discounts, so it's never quite as simple as you think. And then, of course, there's notices as well. So one of the things that we find kind of funny is we get most of our referrals from CTAs, and the interesting thing is they don't even want to do this because it's mundane, it's tactical, it's not strategic, and it's risky. So they would rather refer it to us. And again, same thing for you. Yeah, you could do it, but why would you want to do this thankless job when you could focus more on your business and let us focus on this? So again, let me circle back and kind of give you the step-by-step. So Avalara has three components: the AvaTax, or Sage Sales Tax as it's known in the Sage universe, cert capture, and returns. So this is where we do the calculations, and again, the magic is we validate the address, we administer sourcing rules as appropriate, we assign the jurisdictions, we know the taxability of every line item for every jurisdiction, and we do the calculation automatically and effortlessly on your part, and then there's full reporting available to you within AvaTax. Then with the certificates we kind of went through, you request it, customer goes to the wizard, you get it back, stored electronically, it integrates with Sage 300, and then you can automatically renew when they expire. With the returns, we're going to do a worksheet. You just click approve. We prepare the return, we file it, we send the money in. You even have the ability to click and see a return, and we'll even handle the notices. So in a nutshell, that's how it works. So we thought you might wonder, well, okay, Sal, it sounds kind of interesting. I sort of get why it's hard, and seems like I understand how the software works. You know, why do people buy? One of the things we found is that half the C-level executives we know told us that if an auditor came in, they'd probably find mistakes. So they know that this is almost impossible to do correctly. The other thing they know is they're already spending a lot of time and money on it today. So what Avalara can do is reduce the amount of time, the amount of money, the amount of aggravation you're spending on compliance and allow you to focus it on growing your business. Again, we talked about this before. We get so many of our leads from CTAs because they don't want to do it. We also find that when you have someone handling sales tax for your company, it's a very high turnover job. So what happens a lot of times is you then have like a CFO or an owner or somebody who's overqualified even working on it, and that's a very big opportunity cost. Again, I really think the proof is in the pudding, and with 96% of our clients renewing every year, I think it shows how much they value it. I often say that AvaTax is like an appliance where you didn't know you needed it until you got it, and once you got it, you're never going back to the old way. So if you want to think about a few years ago, maybe before you ever had a smartphone, I don't think too many of us will ever go back to the old technology. In fact, many people don't even have a house phone anymore. So I share that because I know 5 years ago I didn't think I needed one and never would, and now I have it and it's with me all the time. So that's a lot how our software is. Once you use it, it's so much easier than what you're doing today that you never go back. So let's talk about what you can do about it. These are some of the things that we do for folks, and we've been doing a lot of this lately. So anybody who wants to, we'll schedule a call, and what we're going to do is look at your business. What do you sell? Whom do you sell it to? Where do you sell? How do you go to market? And then we're going to figure out, do you have Nexus in places that you didn't know? If so, what's your liability? How do you get registered? Are you sure you're doing your taxability right? Is there a better way to do it? So we're going to walk you through these things really specific to your business, your situation, your role, and then we'll show you more deliberately and more detail how Avalara accomplishes these tasks in a better way. So a little bit about Avalara is we've been around over 10 years. We're growing like absolute wildfire. We've been given over $100 million of venture capital funding in the last year, and we've had all kind of new executives with fantastic credentials join our firm. Our board of directors is like a who's who of the best East Coast and West Coast colleges, best colleges in the world, in the highest degree background. The reason I'm sharing that with you, it might sound like a funny thing to talk about, is if you want to see who the next big thing is, follow the money, follow the talent. They're all going to Avalara, and I say that with pride because our company is the best in our industry, and we're growing the fastest. We have more customers than anybody, and I think that speaks to the quality of what we deliver, right? Anybody could say that they're good, but the numbers don't lie, and just think that that's something to think about as you consider a vendor. One last thing, Sage is making an offer where they're featuring Avalara through June 30th. And so normally our pricing model is you pay activation fee one time and then you pay an annual fee based on which Sage product you're using and based on the number of transactions. So we've got that now as a extra incentive for folks who would purchase. And then one of the things Avalara is doing is anyone who would schedule a demo between now and the 15th, if you should happen to later buy Avalara, we will also offer a free installation. So normally the installation, Avalara charges $830. So we're going to throw in a free installation over and above the savings that Sage is offering for any folks who schedule a discovery and a demonstration in the next 10 days. And again, that call takes 45 minutes to an hour. And our goal with that call is that you'd have everything you need to know in order to consider Avalara or not. Again, don't want you to think we're trying to be too salesy, but what we find is when we talk to folks, we often uncover risks that they didn't know they had, and they're often surprised by how much easier and how much better it could be with automation. So what we're saying is give us an hour of your time, let us show you the difference between what you're doing now and how it could be, and then, you know, one of three things is going to happen. You're either going to want to buy it right away. 2, you're going to say, you know what, that's real great, but it's not for me. Or 3, as happens often, I think that's really great. I'd like to do something about it, but not right now. I've got other things. Let's talk again in X months. So either way, we love the opportunity. At a bare minimum, I think you're going to learn something about sales tax and about automation. And I know I do these calls a couple of times a day, and I learn something every time. So with that, thank you, and hopefully that was just a really quick, fast overview, and be happy to answer any questions.